My name is Tarun Kade. I'm the curatorial director of Tangente Festival, of which this Tipping Time conference is a part. And I'm very happy to sit here with Amanda Piña and Künstlerin Ramirez and Angela Munoz, who's translating for Clemente. And maybe to give a bit of context, Amanda is a Chilean Mexican choreographer and researcher and founder of the School of Mountains and Waters.
Thank you very much, Tarun, and thank everybody for being here. I would like to explain a bit what is the thought behind the School of Mountains and Water, the project that brings us together. Before, I wanted to excuse the participation of my colleague, Leonel Lienlaf, who could not come because in the place where he lives, he's a Mapuche artist. And there is a lot of militarization at the moment in Araucanía, so he couldn't travel. The settler colonial power in that case is Chilean and also German forestry, German and Swiss forestry. So Clemente could come. His father, who was going to come, also couldn't come because he got sick. So at the end, we did a beautiful work with Clemente. It's the first time we worked together, and it has been very beautiful. So I just wanted to explain that that's why we are not the original crew. And to talk about the School of Mountains and Waters, I wanted to start by explaining a bit what is the idea of the project. We think in many places in the American continent, Abya Yala, we think and we have learned to understand the land, not as objectual, but as a pedagogy, as a context full of knowledge. In this form of thought, trees, mountains, lakes, rivers are beings that have knowledge. They are not object-like in Western thought. They are not objects in relation to one subject human, but they are themselves wise, and they carry information, knowledge, experience. And trying to create a project in which we would operate within this idea of indigenous thought, it was important to think about the notion of site-specific and go beyond it. If we think about site-specific in performances, that you do something in a place and you sort of bring it to the place. And this project tries to be territorial sensitive or land sensitive, and listen to what is the information, the knowledge that is already in the territory in terms of history, but also in terms of maybe immaterial forms of forces. So it's a bit different to what maybe Stefan Kegi was presenting. He was talking about the notion of landscape. And here, because we are located in the global south, in our thought and experience, we are trying to think beyond colonial thought. We think that modern colonial thought, or what we call Western thought today, is not a solution or a way of repairing the earth today. Cannot be repaired with the same tools that destroy it. And since the tools are forms of thinking that we have inherited from modernity coloniality, which for us is one process, right? We see modernity and coloniality as one thing. We don't think that coloniality is the collateral damage of modernity, but we think they happen hand in hand. Extraction is allowed by a narrative. And this narrative understands rivers, lakes, glaciers, forests, mountains, trees as objectual, as raw materials, as natural resource. So we think that we have to change language, right? Because if we are thinking with the tools that destroy, how are we going to halt this mode of relation? So the idea of the School of Mountains and Waters is to be a school of unlearning. to unlearn this mode of thinking in which we can say, okay, water is H2O and all waters are the same. To open for other forms of understanding water, understanding land, understanding the living. And the first like sort of motivation to do that project happened because where I come from, where my mother lives and where I grew up in the Andes, there is a big mining corporation called Anglo-American, and they are melting glaciers. And it is very painful because the mining requires a lot of water that is then polluted, and it circulates then in the communities, and it makes people sick, or it has too much heavy metals. There's also waste for mining, so on. So when this project started, it started really from a sensation of discomfort that it was very personal, yeah? And it has expanded to other territories upon other informations and invitations. And what we want to say here maybe today, what is important is that if we are thinking about a transition, an energy transition, the only way to have an energy transition that for us it would be fair is if we start an energy transition that is post-extractivist. So extractivism in the Global South is fueling this, yeah? And this we all know. But then there is a narrative that allows extraction. And it is the way we understand water, the way we understand mountains. Even the notion of landscape is a colonial notion, because it's almost like a picture there, empty, to be filled by the human emotion. That is the history of landscape in modernity. So we would like to invite you to think a bit differently today, to make this exercise of trying to understand the way this modern colonial language shapes our experience, creates certain relations that produce the destruction of Earth. And it is a rehearsal, because we don't know if it's possible, but it is also the possibility to create ontological openings, spaces between what we know and what we don't know, others know, and maybe we can almost understand. So it's something about humbling what we know, what we assume is true. And there I have the pleasure in this project to have collaborated with teachers from indigenous communities for all these different schools of mountains and waters. We did already in the Erste Wiener Wasserleitung in relation to the history of that infrastructure and the history of Vienna and water. We have done one in Chile, in the Andes, which was a very important one for me, in which we encounter the violent reality of extraction and how it operates in the Global South. Today, with this energy transition, we know that it doesn't offer any alternative to extraction. It's just changed this extraction for this other extraction. So, what would be a form of transition that would start unveiling the way we think about, for example, water, so that the language we use cannot allow extraction. Because if we think in terms of natural resource, we already open the door. And this might be radical, no? Because we're thinking about natural resources. So I invited Clemente today to tell us a bit about what water is in other contexts and which other forms of relation the Wirras practice today. And I would like to give the word to Clemente and start this conversation in relation to how the indigenous people, the Wirraritari nation, are located in relation to the territory, and how do they operate in this context. ¿Cómo se relaciona? So, Clemente, welcome. Bienvenido, qué bueno que viniste. Y cuéntanos un poquito de cómo los wirras entienden el territorio. ¿Sí? ¿Cómo es esa geografía?
Antes que nada, buenas tardes a todos.
I go right. Before everything, good evening, everybody. Good afternoon. Sí.
Pues un gusto estar aquí con ustedes. Agradezco a esta invitación
It's a pleasure to be here with you, and I thank this invitation
porque este proyecto que empezaron con mi papá, pues no pudo venir.
My father couldn't come, and he started this project together with Amanda.
Entonces estoy aquí en representación de él.
So I'm here in representation of my father.
Pero antes que todo soy perteneciente del pueblo Wixárika.
And yeah, I am part of the Wixárika nation.
No es tan grande la extensión territorial como el pueblo Wixárika, pero lo que puedo entender, lo que puedo explicar, aquí les voy a platicar un poco.
So the extension of the Wixárika nation is not very, very big, but what I can already tell you today.
Esto empieza, este conocimiento que nosotros hemos heredado, empieza desde la formación de nuestra planeta Tierra, porque nuestros ancestros, nuestros abuelos, nos han enseñado este camino.
So the knowledge we have inherited starts really from the beginning of the formation of the planet. Our ancestors has inherited to us this knowledge, this path.
Por eso es que nosotros entendemos la forma como podemos mantener nuestra tierra, a nuestro alrededor.
So we have learned a particular form of maintaining the earth and the surroundings.
Entonces, puedo decir que la tierra necesita su mantenimiento, así como el agua.
So for us, and what we learn and what I can say is that the earth and the water needs maintaining. It's not something that is just there and that you just take, but it needs to be maintained. Also in ways that are not only practical, in ways maybe of conversation.
Entonces, estoy aquí igualmente para aprender o conocer algo nuevo, que es la primera vez que viajo para participar en este encuentro.
So it's the first time I participate in this encounter, and maybe, yeah, I am here also to learn. Pero nos podría contar un poco de cómo mantiene, o sea, cómo es esta práctica de mantener. ¿Cómo se entiende el mantenimiento de la tierra? I ask a bit if he can tell us a bit about how this maintaining works.
En el mantenimiento de la tierra me refiero a nosotros lo entendemos porque la tierra es nuestra madre, es como una persona, así lo entendemos.
So we understand the maintainment of the earth as taking care of a mother. The earth is like a mother, that's how we understand. So it's like a person, like a being. It's not material.
Entonces, así como lo que nos pide, lo que nos enseña, le estamos cumpliendo de alguna forma que como lo entendemos.
So what the earth and the rivers and the waters and the springs ask us to do is what we sort of reciprocate as we understand it is needed.
Entregándole regalos, ofrenda.
So through the practice of bringing presents, offerings, acknowledging, entering in conversation.
porque entendemos que requiere de alimentación, requiere de algún regalo y por eso es que le cumplimos como lo que nos pide.
Because we understand it requires some present, it requires some food. It is not only there, but it also requires some care. ¿puedo hacer un paréntesis ahí? I wanted to say before that, Western thought also has taught us to think that what indigenous people believe are minor forms of knowledge, and that Western thought is the only real form of knowledge. So when we started talking about this project and the idea that if we're going to think a way out of the crisis, we need to think it with other tools, I think the exercise for us and in general when we encounter people in the West, and we bring this work, is to think beyond this ethnocentric thought, ethnocentric Western thought. Like we have science, we have knowledge, and they have cultural belief. So I invite you today to think about what would mean, that to think that the Earth, maybe she also wants some presents. Yeah. Vamos, sigamos. Presente, regalos, ¿qué más? Arte, ¿no? También arte, como cantan.
Porque de ahí nuestros abuelos y nuestros padres le han hecho los cantos que vienen también desde nuestros antepasados y todavía no se pierde ese canto. Por eso es que le cantamos, para que también se alegre, se contente, y así de esa forma nos está respondiendo de que sí, le estamos cumpliendo, le estamos regalando lo que nosotros también requerimos de ella, ¿no?
So we have inherited a practice of chanting. Chanting that is not only for humans, but it's also for others, for earth beings. And when we practice this chanting and when we relate to earth beings, mountains or springs of water or rivers, through this practice of offering and chanting, we also realize when they respond. We also notice when they respond, when they are satisfied by our actions, when they listen to the singing. Está bueno. Otra pregunta. So today we thought I will ask some questions, and later we can open questions for you. ¿Cómo hacen colectivamente los wirras para hacer este mantenimiento? ¿Cómo se organizan en el territorio? ¿Cómo logran ponerse de acuerdo? How the wirras make this as a collective effort, because it's not an individual thing. You go and chant, but it has to be collective, and it has to be in relation to this territory, which is also understood as a body, as a living body. Entonces, ¿cómo lo hacen en el territorio?
Estamos relacionados también con el sol. No necesitamos contactarnos de manera directa, sino a cómo se mueve el sol, a su dirección, y de esa forma la comunidad sabe en qué momento nos concentramos para realizar este comunicado con las deidades, porque de esa forma nosotros lo entendemos. Y entonces nos juntamos desde los más ancianos hasta los niños. Y de esa forma aprenden los niños cómo es que nos podemos organizar para realizar este trabajo.
So how we organize to do these works that we have inherited that have to do with maintaining and speaking and chanting and giving something back to the earth beings, the beings of the earth, something that my teacher Clemente's father told me is for the wirras everything has eye, hand, and know how to speak. Maybe it speaks a different language, maybe it has a different eye, but it can touch, receive, or give. And it can also listen. So the way they do that is by following the phases of the sun. So in determined moments of the sun calendar, they know when they have to do this this work, which is a work that is not for humans. It's a cultural, artistic, and social activist work that is not for people, but for maintaining the relation with the living earth. And in that way, when they meet, also they focus on the children so that the children can continue this work of maintaining.
I have a question that connects maybe. It's a question about time, because the title of this conference is called the tipping time, so we're in a moment in that sense, saying like, okay, this is a moment of change. In the talk before with Karin Harasa, she called it an age of uncertainty, like times of uncertainty. And you said in the beginning, and I really liked that, that you said what you want to do with a focus in a different different world of knowledge, basically, a form of knowledge, is to change a conversation from what you sometimes call a monoculture of thought. So when we talk about the climate change, there is, of course, initiatives like Fridays for Future. It's about the future. And then there is this ancestral forms of knowledge. So I would like to know, maybe in the learning or unlearning, maybe in this conversation about time in context of climate change also, if there's something to say.
Empiezo yo. Sí, so for how I understand Western colonial idea of time is a line and it goes to the future and is projected temporality, no? So it's always towards the front, and the contemporary is interesting because it's now, and it's also a system of exclusion. So indigenous people cannot be contemporary, they are traditional, they are like kind of in the back. It's a system that is, it's a system of thought that is also racist in a way. It's based on racism, yeah? And the question of time for indigenous people, as I humbly understand it, is not unidirectional. It's more on the mode of precedence. So what precedes me is in front of me, because is before me because it's before. What precedes me is before me because it's before. And it's a very good antidote to this thinking of time. Now we are in a moment of like hot times, like change portal. As I understand, a lot of things have to change drastically. There is a lot of cretinismo, there's a lot of stupidity in the world. And some people like you and the Wirras and others know that there is an urgent change to do, but it takes time and it's difficult to bring it into motion, even though it's already here. How I would think this time is more like a portal. This is my humble feeling of this time. It's a portal where things are going to be soon very different, and we're going to have problems. And we see them in other places, especially in the global south, unluckily. Yeah.
Clemente also,
Clemente,
you want to comment on this?
Hablar algo sobre el tiempo, porque a lo mejor ustedes tienen otra idea del tiempo completamente, pero cuando van a Viricuta van al tiempo antiguo también, ¿no? Se mueven en el tiempo. ¿Puede hablar un poco de eso?
Pues hablar del tiempo es sobre todo hay una señal desde los animales hasta los aves que siempre es un aviso que es el momento de hacer las cosas, porque siempre hay un señal de que ellos están comenzando a prepararse, y entonces nosotros también ya nos damos cuenta que es el momento de de salir, de hacer algo para el bien de nosotros mismos.
So in relation to time, there are also a lot of signals of other beings like birds and other insects and other, in this case for the Wirras, other forms of people, like animals and insects, that also like indicate rhythms and moments in time to do things.
Entonces así ya estamos organizando ya sea la salida para ir en algún lugar, porque ellos mismos también ya empiezan a resguardarse, irse en otro lugar, porque saben que algo va a suceder durante unos días, y así todos, así como decía desde un principio, así es como se mueve la tierra, es como una persona, de qué lado está moviendo ya sus brazos, sus pies, y entonces ya estamos preparados para eso porque ya lo estamos escuchando, ya estamos recibiendo esa información a través de los animales o a través de los aves, ¿no?
So as I said before, for us, the earth and the land is very much like a person. So when it moves and animals move, we know already, okay, we are doing it correctly if it moves, if we are moving the world with our actions. Y eso en relación al tiempo, ¿cómo tú sientes el tiempo ahora ¿cómo sienten las comunidades el tiempo ahora en relación al cambio climático? Porque aquí se habla mucho de cambio climático y de crisis y de transformación.
Últimamente ya lo hemos sentido, pero
So we have already felt climate change in
pero
the
como
communities.
nosotros estamos muy alejados,
But since we are very far from the cities,
a veces cuando llegas a una ciudad grande, igual ya hay gente que se preocupa,
sometimes when you arrive to a big city, you see that people are more worried.
pero esto nosotros lo vemos como al estar en la comunidad, en el pueblo, nosotros siempre hemos mantenido nuestro territorio con este trabajo para que no suceda, pero
So we have been thinking since the beginning, and that's what we inherited, to maintain the territory in a way that this balance doesn't work, doesn't happen. But when we see that, other people treat the land and the territory in other ways, we understand that is out of balance, that it's not being addressed, it's not being cared for.
entonces los pocos que quedan, los abuelos, dicen que necesitamos regresar como era antes, porque ahora en la actualidad estamos pensando con otras ideas, pero ellos quieren que regresemos, volver a comenzar a como ellos hacían el trabajo, para que esto se vuelva a ser normal.
So the elders think that if we do the work like it was really given to us, this word of maintaining, of addressing, of chanting, of visiting the sacred sites, of talking to the rivers, of talking to the mountain, of doing all these offerings and presents, if we do it correctly, things are going to be okay. The point is that we are the only ones doing it. Or, indigenous people are doing it, but it's maybe not enough.
Maybe, one thing to add to this, being in the Sonnenpark, in this very beautiful space that hosts us, that this is something very specific. The maintenance that has kind of been put into this space by a certain number of people, a grassroots initiative. So we're very thankful that we can have this conference here. One thing I found very important that you said in context of changing the conversation is that you said we already have felt climate change. So it's not something about the future, but it's something about the present, or even of the past, and in that sense, the context of time changes through the travel in space that we are doing here in this conversation. Maybe another thing that I would like to ask in this context is, because this is a festival of culture, you're received as an artist mainly, I think. We had this conversation about the shared landscapes, in which, by the way, this notion of landscape was also questioned in the sense that you commented on. What is, in that moment of change or uncertainty, the role that art or culture can take from your perspective?
Well, I've learned to unlearn a lot about what Western thought thinks art is. Yeah, in relation, for example, of working with the father of Clemente, understanding that art, in the context of the Wirras, is not only for humans, and it's not something that is individually done. It's not about genius, but really about ritual, spiritual, political, and social practice, that it goes together. So I think art is super important. But this is maybe because I think that we, in the West, we have all these different disciplines that are separated. And we need them to come together. I think this portal of climate change invites us to work across disciplines, across fields. And the notion of field is also super colonial, because it has to do with the enclosures also that, created primitive accumulation in Europe in the medieval times, that expelled the people from the land, so they couldn't live anymore in the land, so they had to work for the owner. And here we are today with 5 people, 6, 11 that own everything in the world. Like the accumulation has never been so strong than today. Mining industry is absolutely one of, the biggest resource grabbers in the world. And I think that we need to let go of this notion of enclosed fields, because we are not going to be able to respond to the challenges that we face, not as individuals, and not within enclosed fields. So what I see in art and in art as research is the possibility to, penetrate and contaminate and get together and create conversations and relations between these enclosed domains. And I think that is super important. This is my thought.
¿Y qué piensas tú, Clemente? ¿Por qué el arte sería importante hoy en términos de crear conciencia? ¿Por qué el arte es importante? El arte wirra, ¿por qué es importante hoy? ¿Cómo es importante el canto, el arte? ¿Cuál es la importancia del arte? ¿Cómo lo ves tú?
El arte, pues para nosotros es algo que nosotros lo vivimos.
So art for us is something that we live.
Y lo dibujamos.
And we draw it.
A como nosotros vemos a nuestro entorno.
In the way we see the surrounding.
De esa forma aprendemos cómo vamos aprendiendo cada vez más.
In that way we learn slowly.
Y eso pues sí es una enseñanza de
how to see. And that is a teaching.
Hacia el tiempo atrás de nuestros antepasados.
And that is a very old teaching from our elders, the elders of the elders, the first wirras.
Porque realmente no hay un escrito que nosotros tenemos, sino lo vivimos a través del arte,
de la planta, ¿no?
De las plantas, y entonces, y así es como nosotros.
So we don't have a book, we don't have something written, actually, or we learn from plants. It's actually the knowledge of a plant that sort of carries the memory of our people, of the knowledge of our people, and it is related to how we see then art, ¿no? Tiene que ver con cómo se ve, cómo vemos, sí. Y cómo ver de otra forma, lo de Niérica. Sí. How do we see and how can we learn to see different?
I have one last question, maybe. Today is the day of initiatives, and a lot of initiatives have come together, assembled over there to present their work in context of climate change. We have heard these portraits of the protagonists of change. I was wondering, kind of you, with your initiative as artists, activists, have now come to St. Pölten to share these thoughts or to share this knowledge, and I'm very thankful for you doing that. But I would still like to know what it means to travel with that knowledge in a completely different context, because this is also what I was asking myself, of course, seeing your artwork and that,
Well, I think it's very important to hear, to have present here experiences from the Global South, because as we know, extractivism is fueling all this, and we need to change the way we think energy sources, but not only change energy sources for other energy sources, but really go beyond extractivism. That's the only fair way to do this, and it's also the only way that will not produce more and more climate change catastrophe. So I know that in Europe there is a lot of thought about not traveling, and I find sometimes very naive the thinking from climate change sometimes from here. And it is an interesting negotiation and conversation. How can we bring these different perspectives when we haven't been at the places of extraction? How can we account for what it means to be, for example, Chile, which is a mining country, that was made a mining country, on purpose by the CIA, by the push of Pinochet, so that all these minerals could flow towards the north through these big mining corporations, which, interestingly enough, are super old capitals. Like I want to say that with the research in St. Pölten, it was really also striking for me to understand that Strabag, for example, is a profiteer, is a Second World War profiteer that built for thought organization structures of, concentration camps and extermination camps. So it's hardcore, People in Austria don't know it. I was struck to understand in this territory that the Vierhofner See, which has been a place for, that all that is related, that Strabag today is built in the Andes. Infrastructure for water grabbing that will, take the water away from my friends, the community of friends. And that in Israel, Mekorot invites Strabag to build a big pipeline that will bring the water, across to Jerusalem, when we know that Mekorot has been an enterprise that oppresses the native population and uses water as a way of dispossession and eviction. So it's interesting to see that actually the ones who have all the capital, the ones who are polluting the most, keep on being the same. And that we want to put the blame on the individual. And why don't you have an electrical car? And I tell you that the electrical car needs lithium. And Chile has a lot of lithium, but Austria too. Watch out. So extraction is also being imported. So I think we really need to, it's very important to travel. It's very important to encounter ourselves and discuss things across difference, across colonial difference. Because race, I think, is a mark of a position in history. So through that conversation, I think we need to get together and understand things and how complex they are. And don't simplify, and don't put the blame on the individual. Yes, we need to modify a lot, but we also need to know who's responsible. I would like to invite Clemente to close with the water, because I am in the School of Mountains and Waters, that tomorrow is the last day and you're invited to come. It starts at 2 in Glanstoff. We have been thinking a lot about what water is and what water can be beyond modern colonial thought. So could you tell us what water is for the Wirras?
Para el pueblo wixárika, el agua es un hijo como nosotros.
For the Wirra people, water is like a daughter, a son, like us, a kid, a child.
Y su madre es la tierra.
Her mother is the earth.
En donde estamos ubicados por el norte de México.
Where we are located in the north of Mexico.
Tiene una forma, el terreno tiene una forma de un, que nosotros lo conocemos como ojo de Dios.
The land has a form that we call it eye of the God, which is like a rhomboid.
Entonces, por eso hemos dicho que es una persona que tiene manos.
That's why we have said that the land for us, our territory, is like a person that has hands, manos,
que tiene sus pies y su
that
cabeza.
has feet and a head.
En donde estamos nosotros ubicados es el centro, en el corazón de esa persona.
And we are located in the heart of that person, earth.
Y entonces, como decíamos, lo tratamos como un niño que requiere de algo que nos pide.
So we treat water as a child that requires something. It asks for something. It needs some caring.
Para nosotros el ciclo del año empieza en junio.
For us, the cycle of the year starts in June.
Y en ese momento le ofrendamos regalos.
And in that moment we give presents to water.
La cosecha que dio durante el año.
The harvest we had in the year.
Las semillas.
The seeds.
Para que nos vuelva a dar.
So that it give us away again.
En ese ciclo que viene.
In that cycle that it will come.
Y así de esa forma nosotros hemos recolectado del norte a sur.
In that way we have collected from north to south.
Los ríos que hay, los arroyos, hemos recolectado el agua.
From the streams, from the springs, we collect the water.
Para unirlo, hacerlo uno solo de esos 4 puntos cardinales.
To connect the water from these different points and make it one.
Y así, de esa forma, lo estamos manteniendo vivo.
In that way, we maintain it alive through this exchange, so that water also needs alterity, otherness. Other waters want to meet.
Y entonces, así es como nosotros así es como trabajamos. Para nosotros el agua es una persona.
That's how we work. For us, water is a person.
Que siente y que respira como nosotros.
And that breathes with us.
Cuando los trabajos lo hacemos en unión como todo el pueblo wixárika.
And the works we do in relation to water and maintaining its breath, we do all together, all the wixárika communities together.
Y pues yo creo que para mí eso es todo, así como lo entendemos nosotros el agua.
And that would be how we understand water.
Thank you so much. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias.